Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. Ever since I was a little kid, my family would take trips up to a small lake town in the countryside. We didn't own one of those fancy lake houses or anything, but we would rent cabins for a week or two each summer. As I got older, those trips up to the lake became my favorite times of the year. There was just something so peaceful and refreshing about being out there surrounded by nature and away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. When I graduated college and got my first real job, I decided to buy a little vacation cabin of my own up at the lake. It was a modest place, just a simple A-frame cabin with 2 small bedrooms and 1 bathroom. But to me it was perfect. I was so proud and excited to have a place of my own that I could visit whenever I wanted and create new memories in. The first couple summers were absolute bliss. I'd drive up to the cabin almost every weekend just to sit out on the porch with a book or hike through the nearby trails. It felt so good to get away from the chaos of work in the city. The cabin was my own personal sanctuary. That is, until Karen showed up. It was late May of my 3rd summer owning the cabin. I had just stocked the pantry and filled up the propane tanks in anticipation of spending the upcoming Memorial Day weekend up there. I had taken the day off work on Friday and was hitting the road by 7 a.m., excited to get my first long weekend of the summer started. Except when I pulled up to the cabin, there was an unfamiliar car parked out front. Confused, I walked up to the front door and tried to unlock it, only to find that my key no longer worked. Then it dawned on me. Someone must be inside my cabin. I pounded on the door, and a few minutes later, a middle-aged woman with a pixie cut and way too much makeup answered. "Can I help you?" she asked in an annoyed tone. Yes. You can tell me what you're doing in my cabin," I replied. "Your cabin?" she scoffed. "I rented this place fair and square on vacationhomes.com for me and my family for the long weekend. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have unpacking to do." She tried closing the door, but I held it open. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what listing you found online, but this is my cabin. I have owned it for 3 years. Now please gather your family and leave at once." The woman, who I shall call Karen from here on out, just stared at me like I was crazy. I rented this cabin through a very reputable website. I paid in full, and my family drove 5 hours to get here. We're not going anywhere. I was starting to get seriously annoyed. Let me make this clear. This is my property. I have the deed, I have the keys, and you are trespassing. Now please leave before I call the police. Karen folded her arms across her chest defiantly. "Go right ahead and call the cops. I'll show them my rental confirmation. This is our rental for the weekend, and you're going to have to drag me out of here if you want me to leave." I was fuming at this point. I could tell this woman was clearly deranged. I got back in my car and immediately dialed the local police to report the incident. As I was waiting for them to arrive, I noticed 2 kids exit the cabin with beach toys in hand. They ran towards the lake shore behind my property. Karen must have brought her whole family here. 20 frustrating minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. I explained the situation to the officer, showed him my deed and keys as proof of ownership. He went to the door to speak with Karen, who was still insisting she had properly rented the place. But when the officer asked to see her rental confirmation, her tone quickly changed. Well, you see, the website is down right now," she stammered. "But I definitely rented this. I spoke to someone on the phone and have the credit card charged to prove it." The officer asked Karen for the name of the website and the person she spoke with to confirm the rental. She hemmed and hawed, making excuse after excuse about why she couldn't provide that information. The officer turned back to me. "Unfortunately, since she has no physical proof of making a rental and you have documentation showing ownership, she has no legal standing to be here. I still suggest you contact your lawyer about this, though." He went to go track down Karen's family from the lake while I stood on the porch, shaking my head in disbelief. How could someone seriously just move their whole family into a random cabin without confirming it's available? A few minutes later, the officer emerged from the trees with Karen's husband and 2 young kids in tow. The husband kept apologizing profusely, saying he had no idea his wife hadn't actually confirmed their rental. As Karen stomped angrily out of the cabin, she shot me a nasty glare. "I hope you're happy. You just ruined my whole family's long weekend." I had to stop myself from laughing out loud. "Ma'am, you tried to steal my cabin. You're lucky I'm not pressing charges for trespassing." Now get off my property before I change my mind, Karen gasped dramatically, as if I had just insulted her entire ancestry. She stormed off toward their car, her kids and husband scrambling to grab their bags and follow behind. I watched closely as they packed up and drove away, making sure they were really gone. Then I went inside and took stock of the place. It was a disaster zone. There were clothes and dirty dishes everywhere, food smeared on the countertops, and even muddy footprints on the living room rug. I spent the next 2 hours scrubbing every surface until the place was spotless again. Needless to say, my relaxing long weekend was completely ruined. The nerve of that woman, thinking she could just commandeer someone else's property like that. I immediately contacted vacationhomes.com, and they confirmed there were no current or recent listings for my address. I also spoke to my lawyer about filing a cease and desist order against Karen if she ever tried anything like this again. After that whole ordeal, I installed a security system on the cabin with cameras covering every angle. I also started requiring guests to show ID matching the name used for the reservation before giving them the keys. It was a shame I had to start taking such precautions, but clearly I couldn't be too careful with people like Karen running around. She almost ruined my favorite sanctuary, but I sure wasn't going to let her or anyone else ever try that again. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I, 26F at the time, had just started dating Thomas, 28M, and things seemed promising. Very sweet man, educated and quite smart, good looks. After 7 weeks of dating, he invited me and 2 of his childhood friends, let's call them Alex and Bart, for a long 29th birthday celebration weekend at his father's country house in a small French town. His father was going to be around as well, and I was very excited to meet everyone. Day 1, Friday, is fun. I'm happy to get along well with Thomas's father, a smart and caring man. Day 2, Saturday. After a very nice day, we enjoy a party in the garden with the neighbors, including some friends of Thomas. After a few hours and lots of drinks, a group of people gather around a small campfire and start sharing childhood memories. This is where things go wrong. At first, of course, innocent and dumb stories as you would expect. But then, Thomas and his friends started sharing really sick stuff. In particular, they told a story about how, when they were 14 or 15 years old, they found very amusing to bully for almost 6 months Arthur, a boy of their school who was very isolated and shy. Making jokes, calling names, you name it. As if this was not enough, they created a fake girl profile on MSN Messenger, a computer platform to exchange live messages that we used in years 2000s, and spent ducking months, exchanging messages with him under the false girl identity, flirting and developing a false relationship with the poor boy. Some people were in the confidence at school, and it became a big and cruel joke behind Arthur's back. They used pictures of Bart's real cousin, and the boy truly thought he had some kind of online girlfriend to whom he even sent confessions and love messages. At some point, they got bored and scheduled a false rendezvous IRL, asking the boy to take a bus for 2 or 3 hours, wearing a t-shirt, Elmer the Elephant, based on a private joke. Obviously, there was no one waiting for him, and they did not know how long he waited over there, by himself. If Arthur had not already understood what was going on, he found out the next day at school after Thomas and Bart told the story to everyone, and even shared the love messages that Arthur had been writing. The poor boy stopped coming to class and apparently changed school, and it is easy to imagine that this must have been extremely traumatizing to him. Do you think that Thomas, Alex, and Bart had any bit of shame about it? Not a bit of remorse, in particular on Thomas and Bart's side. They kept making jokes about it and even seemed to regret that they were not good enough at being evil to convince the boy to send nudes or sexy pics. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if he had done so. To say that I felt uncomfortable would be a gross understatement. I was absolutely horrified and started to despise Thomas more than anything. I was not the only one shocked. Thomas's father, who heard the end of the story, had the most disappointed look in the eyes. His stupid son was so drunk that he did not even notice it. I escaped the party immediately after that and got back to the house. I could not sleep at all this night, and I kept thinking about the evening and how Thomas was still finding this funny. I heard him coming to bed around 4 a.m., but I pretended I was asleep. Day 3, Sunday, was the actual birthday, and the initial plan was that I would take Thomas on a one fancy surprise date for lunch nearby, and then we would meet the group for a late afternoon party. But instead, I woke up very early on Sunday morning, took all my stuff in silence, and went alone to the train station where I took a direct train heading back to Paris. I decided to send a text to Thomas, wishing him happy birthday, and telling him to meet me at a certain location 1 hour from the house for a surprise, and that I needed to go a little bit in advance to make sure that everything would be perfect. I had picked the location randomly, using Google Maps to gain time. Thomas read the text around 10 a.m. when he woke up. He responded with excitement that he would follow religiously the instructions. When he arrived there at 12:30, I told him to wait further as there was little delay on something. Then I asked him to meet me at a restaurant which was 30-minute drive from the initial location. When he arrived at 13:15, I texted him that I was on my way, would arrive in 20 min, and that he will understand when he sees me why I made him wait. I also asked him to order some food and the most expensive bottle on the menu. Around 13:30, he started calling me several times and sent a lot of worried texts, and after 45 minutes I responded in French. So how does it feel to have people play with your feelings? Then I stopped responding. I let him call and text the entire afternoon, but never responded. At some point, an unknown number called me. It was his friend Alex asking what was going on and that Thomas' birthday was completely ruined because of what I did. I just responded, "This is an extremely small payback for what you did to Arthur. Tell Thomas to stop calling me," and hung up. I blocked them. I still felt bad the entire evening as I had started to grow attached to Thomas back then. The following days, a common friend called me to say that my reaction was completely absurd and unfair, that it was not my role to punish someone for actions they did as a teenager, that they were adult ways of saying things, and that I had been completely crazy. Only a few people supported what I did. Everyone else seemed to think that I was an idiot. Thomas tried to fix things and win me back for a few months afterwards. I never responded to any of his messages. I don't regret it. I simply hope that Arthur, who should be 35 or 36 years old now, is, well, the next one is a petty revenge story, so this is going back a few decades, but I think it was a beautifully executed petty revenge. I worked in the receiving department in the warehouse for a major company that had just expanded to Canada. I was 26 and amping pregnant. The evening shift supervisor, who I'll call Kathy, 24F, used to joke about firing me if I went into labor at work. Now, I'm pretty even-keeled, but this pissed me off. Also pissed off the other ladies in the office, along with being completely illegal. So I concocted my plan, and the ladies helped me out. My due date was August 23rd, and as I got closer and closer to my due date, the firing comments became more frequent. A few days beforehand, I put my plan in motion. I waited until Kathy was coming on shift and took one of my frequent bathroom breaks where I filled a balloon with water and carefully placed it in the crotch of my jeans. I waddled back upstairs to the office and sat at my computer like normal. Once Kathy sat at her desk out with us, about 15 minutes later, I took a kilt pin and, using one of my coworkers as cover, gently poked it into the balloon and started rotating it to really make a watery mess. My coworker, bless her, leaned over as if to check on me, saw that the water was spreading, and sang out, "Oh gee, are you okay?" To which I replied, "I think my water broke." I stood up and yep, big wet spot on my pants. Kathy freaked out, hyperventilating, yelling that I couldn't give birth there, trying to figure out how close I was to having the baby. Another coworker piped up it could be hours or minutes, bless her as well, debating on calling an ambulance or security. It was like watching a chicken run around with its head cut off. 10 minutes later, I yelled April Fools. She got really quiet, then walked out of the office. Honestly, she was a good supervisor, but she shouldn't have pissed off the pregnant lady. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I used to work in a trade shop run by a great boss. Everyone got along great, except for one of the department heads. Let's call them B. For reasons unrelated to this story, the boss decided to sell the shop to B, and in the wake, the majority of the staff quit within months, leaving us understaffed. I naively decided to stick it out and assumed that B would hire people to fill the empty positions, but they didn't. We went from a 15-person trade shop down to 5 people within a year, and that includes the 6 people who turned over. One of the many issues that developed, and there were many, was B's inability to schedule or think through actions to the end and plan ahead. While I worked there, the 2 years with the boss, I often came in 10, 15 minutes early due to the nature of my commute. I'd come in, unload my stuff, make some coffee, engage in small talk with my coworkers, shoot the breeze with my boss, but we never really started work until everyone's scheduled start time. When B took over, the moment you stepped into the shop, B immediately started barking orders at you regardless of whether you were in the building 15, 20 minutes early. Mostly it was because B was in a rush to get something done they had just remembered. When I, now the most senior person left at the shop from the old regime, would point out that we technically weren't on the clock yet for another 15, 20 minutes and that I wanted to make coffee, B would just snap at you, telling you to do it now because so-and-so is coming right at opening. So I started to wait in my car, bringing my coffee from home, and would only walk in the door as the last minute was changing. I was technically never late to work, and was ready to work the moment I stepped through the door. I don't know if B caught on, but the rest of my staff did and followed suit, since I told them to. For the remaining months I lasted there, all my coworkers would still often show up early to work, but all wait in their vehicles. At some point one of them had a minivan and we all partied in there, and would go in as a group. Anytime a new person joined, because someone walked off, we would also warn them of what would happen. It's been several years since I worked there, and I do not know any of the current staff besides B. I happened to be doing an on-site install nearby at the time that shop would open, and I looked over into the parking lot in front of the shop. Like clockwork, a minute before the shop was scheduled to open, about 6 people got out of their vehicles and headed in. I may not work there anymore, but it's nice to see that my resistance still exists. The next one is an entitled people story. Was listening to a Bridezilla story, and it reminded me of something that happened when my lady wife and I were planning our wedding in 1992. Part 1 is background context, and Part 2 is the entitlement. Feel free to skip to Part 2. Permission granted for Redditors to use this on YouTube. Part 1, the wedding we wanted and had. My lady wife is the anti-Karen, the anti-Bridezilla. On our first date, she fanned out a stack of restaurant coupons and said, "Where do you want to take me?" We picked Pizza Hut. Her engagement ring is a heart-shaped amethyst with 2 little diamond chips. I bought it at Kmart. She cherishes it. Her wedding dress did not come from a bridal shop. It came from the Sears catalog. It's a very simple white lace straight tea-length dress with a cream underdress. Would not be out of place at an afternoon tea. I bought my 3-piece navy pinstripe suit since I needed a suit anyway. We wore the same clothes with different accessories to a costume party as a 1920s gangster and his mall. We had the wedding at our church. Our pastor was the real deal. He blessed the rings, and when he handed them back, they were ice cold. We exchanged the old wedding vows, think King James Bible style. My lady wife nixed the obey, though. A couple of my buddies found out at the last minute that they could make it and showed up. After we said our vows, they pulled out swords and made an impromptu arch for us to walk under. My wife's friends were upset and started yelling, "Nobody told us to bring our swords!" Yeah, major sci-fi, fantasy, D&D, medieval geeks on both sides of the aisle. The reception was in the community room at the volunteer fire department I belonged to. Not fancy, but so informal and chill and practically free. A local supermarket with an awesome hot food bar catered. Everybody had so much fun. My boss's boss, a good friend, gorgeous blonde, showed up in her little black dress and appropriately flirted with my buddies. I don't think anybody will forget the pillow mint fight that broke out. A few of my wife's older relatives seemed sort of confused at the antics at first, but ended up having a blast. My father-in-law had set a rough budget for the wedding in his head. My lady wife came in way under that, so he gave us the difference in cash at the reception. He was already paying for the honeymoon as his wedding present to us. Honeymoon was within a day's drive and was a huge deal for what we got. My lady wife remembers the complete total spent by us and Phil as $2,000 in 1992, which included the honeymoon, so under $4,500 today. 32 years together, 31 years married this October. Next anniversary, I'm going to take a page from my granddad and raise a toast to 5 years of wedded bliss. Part 2. Attempted hijacking. When my lady wife announced our engagement, one of her co-workers, not even a friend, apparently got wedding rabies. She was so happy and went over the top offering to help. My lady wife was doing the tiny amount of wedding planning that was needed, see above, as her MOH lived in New Jersey, we're in upstate NY, and had 2 kids to look after. Coworker insisted that it wasn't fair to my wife that the MOH wasn't doing the wedding planning. She kept trying to insert herself as the wedding planner. Nice of her to offer. But she wanted to arrange our wedding the way she wanted it. Whiskey, Tango, Foxtrot. No, we did not want frou-frou centerpiece thingies or any of that nonsense. Coworker, not knowing my wife well, of course, had zero clue what our tastes are. My wife's MOH was already making custom silk flowers for us and the tables as a wedding present. I think Coworker was delusional enough to think she could weasel her way into being MOH. My wife kept politely but firmly shutting her down. Last straw was when Coworker called me to tell me about the surprise bridal shower she was throwing for my wife so I could get her there. Oh, hell no. First, my wife was already going to have a bridal shower. At our house. Phil and I went down to the fire hall and watched baseball. Second, my wife hates surprise parties. Third, my wife would never have picked that restaurant. An overpriced steakhouse is the absolute last restaurant we would ever pick. Fourth, who the heck was Coworker planning on inviting? She didn't know any of my wife's friends. Wife shut that down hard. She immediately called Coworker and told her off. No meltdown, no yelling, no screaming, no bad language or insults. Just pure anger. As hot and bright as a welder's torch. Cue tears from Coworker. Boo-hoo-hoo, I was just trying to help. Nope, denied. We joke that you need to keep my lady wife away from breakable objects when she's angry. Cities, mountain ranges, that kind of fragile stuff. Drama over, and the wedding happened. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.